Karen Wilkins' shriek echoed across Magnolia Lane as she watched in horror while her prized rosebush, the one that had won Best Garden Feature 3 years running at the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association annual competition, tumbled from the second-story window of her home. It landed with a devastating crunch onto her driveway, pottery shattering and soil exploding in all directions like botanical shrapnel. Above, dangling from her bedroom window, was a bewildered moving man holding the other end of what appeared to be her antique dresser. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Karen screeched, her immaculately highlighted blonde bob quivering with rage. The mover's face drained of color. "Ma'am, we were hired to clear out 1422 Magnolia Lane. We have paperwork." "This is 1422 Magnolia Lane, and I most certainly did not hire anyone." Karen's voice reached a pitch that made neighborhood dogs start howling in solidarity. Karen Wilkins wasn't just any homeowner in Sunny Pines Estates. She was key homeowner, HOA president for the past 6 years, a position she'd secured through a combination of relentless campaigning, strategic plate of cookies, and keeping detailed files on every minor infraction her neighbors had committed since 2015. Her power was absolute, her clipboard legendary, and her citation pad the most feared object in a 3-mile radius. 15 minutes, and several threatening phone calls later, Karen stood face-to-face with Derek Chambers, the developer who had apparently purchased her home in a county auction yesterday. "Mrs. Wilkins, I have the deed right here," Derek said, extending a document. "The property was listed for tax delinquency. Everything's legal." Karen snatched the paper, her French manicured nails nearly tearing through it. "This is impossible. I pay my taxes religiously, unlike the heathens in the cul-de-sac who think April 15th is a suggestion." But there it was in black and white. Her home had been sold for unpaid property taxes. 3 years' worth. "There's been a mistake," Karen hissed. "I demand you stop this demolition immediately." Derek smiled with the confidence of a man who had bulldozed many complaints before hers. "No mistake, ma'am. But don't worry, we're building a beautiful new development. Very exclusive. Maybe you could buy one of the units when they're finished next year." Karen's world tilted. The HOA meeting was scheduled at her house tomorrow. The annual garden tour was next week. Her daughter's wedding reception was planned for her backyard in 2 months. As Derek turned away, whistling, Karen felt something unfamiliar bubbling inside her, not just rage, but helplessness. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. Her perfect life, meticulously managed through regulations and citations, was crumbling faster than her award-winning roses. Karen stumbled to her car, neighbors already gathering on their perfectly manicured lawns to witness her downfall. Her phone buzzed with notifications, the HOA group chat exploding with news of her disaster. In her rearview mirror, she watched as the moving crew resumed their work, her possessions being carelessly extracted from the house she'd controlled with an iron fist for nearly a decade. In that moment, Karen Wilkins, terror of Sunny Pines Estates, made a decision that would change everything. Nobody demolishes Karen's life without consequences. Karen spent the night in the Sunny Pines Inn, a quaint establishment she had previously cited 14 times for excessive holiday decorations and non-regulation mailbox height. The irony wasn't lost on the owner, who charged her double with a smile that said everything without saying anything at all. Morning found her at the county records office, a place Karen had frequented often, usually to report neighbors' unauthorized shed dimensions or to verify historical accuracy of exterior paint colors. Today, however, she was the one desperately searching for a loophole. "I don't understand," Karen muttered, scanning property tax records sprawled across the clerk's desk. "I set up automatic payments years ago." The clerk, Mavis Johnson, whose grandson had been banned from setting up a lemonade stand by Karen last summer, took her time responding. "Looks like your payments were going to the wrong property ID. For 3 years." She adjusted her glasses. "You've been paying taxes on an empty lot across town." Karen's stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I'm extremely detail-oriented." Her mind flashed to the numerous neighbors she'd tormented over far lesser errors. The lot was owned by a Margaret Wilkins. Mavis continued, Any relation? Karen froze. Margaret Wilkins, her great-aunt who had passed away 3 years ago. The aunt who had always criticized Karen's rigid nature, who had lived wildly and traveled extensively, who had left Karen. The inheritance, Karen whispered. 3 years ago, Aunt Margaret had left Karen a small parcel of land, deemed worthless by Karen, and completely forgotten until this moment. Somehow, her accounts had gotten crossed, and she'd been diligently paying taxes on a property she'd dismissed while her beloved home accumulated debt. I need to see everything on both properties, Karen demanded, her HOA president voice returning. When Mavis didn't move quickly enough, Karen added a strained, please. 2 hours later, Karen sat in her car, staring at documents with trembling hands. The empty lot wasn't empty at all. It was a 5-acre parcel on what was now the edge of a rapidly developing commercial zone. What had been worthless 3 years ago was now prime real estate, worth nearly 7 times what her home had been. Her phone rang. Sandra Miller, her HOA vice president and longtime rival. Karen, darling. Sandra's saccharine voice oozed through the speaker. Emergency meeting called. We need to discuss leadership changes given your housing situation. Karen's fingers tightened around her phone. Where's the meeting, Sandra? My place, of course. 4 o'clock. The smug satisfaction was unmistakable. Don't worry about bringing anything. Just yourself. And perhaps your resignation letter? Karen ended the call without responding. In her rearview mirror, she caught sight of herself, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, looking nothing like the formidable HOA president who had terrorized Sunny Pines for years. This woman in the mirror was desperate, humiliated, but something else flickered in her reflection. The inheritance papers on her passenger seat represented something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. Aunt Margaret's final gift wasn't just land, it was freedom from the prison of perfection Karen had built around herself. As she started her car, Karen made her second major decision in 24 hours. Before rebuilding her life, she would ensure that certain people, starting with developer Derek Chambers and continuing with Sandra Miller, would regret ever crossing paths with the former queen of Sunny Pines. Sandra Miller's living room buzzed with barely concealed excitement as Sunny Pines' elite gathered for what they all recognized as Karen's execution. Metaphorically speaking, of course, though several residents had brought popcorn. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, a first in HOA history, and walked in with uncharacteristic calm. She'd taken time to restore her appearance, her blonde bob once again perfectly coiffed, her outfit impeccable. Only those who knew her well noticed the missing HOA pin she'd worn religiously for 6 years. Karen, we're so glad you could join us, Sandra said, gesturing to a folding chair placed conspicuously away from the board members' seats. We were just discussing the unfortunate circumstances with your home. Yes, quite unfortunate, Karen replied, remaining standing. But before we continue, I'd like to introduce my guest. All heads turned as a tall woman in an immaculate suit entered, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most of their monthly HOA fees. This is Imani Washington, Karen announced. My attorney. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I wasn't aware this was a legal matter, Sandra said, her smile faltering. It became one when Derek Chambers illegally purchased my property, Karen replied. Ms. Washington, would you explain? Imani stepped forward with the confident stride of someone who bills $700 an hour. We've discovered significant irregularities in the tax sale process. The county failed to provide adequate notice as required by statute. Additionally, we've uncovered evidence suggesting Mr. Chambers had improper communication with county officials to expedite the auction. The room remained silent as Imani continued outlining legal violations that made several board members, who worked in real estate, shift uncomfortably. In short, Imani concluded, we're filing suit against both the county and Chambers Development. Construction has already been halted by emergency injunction. Karen allowed herself a small smile as she watched Sandra's face transition through shock, confusion, and finally, calculation. While this legal process unfolds, Karen said, addressing the room, I'll be temporarily relocating. Which brings me to why I called this meeting. You called this meeting, Sandra sputtered. Karen ignored her. Sunny Pines HOA bylaws, which I personally revised 3 years ago, clearly state that the president must be a property owner within the community. She paused dramatically. I still am. She withdrew a document from her purse and handed copies to each board member. I've purchased 24 Sycamore Court. Gasps erupted around the room. 24 Sycamore Court was the dilapidated eyesore at the community entrance, a property that had sat vacant for years, immune to HOA rules due to an obscure grandfather clause. I'll be renovating extensively, Karen continued, starting with a lovely purple exterior and lawn sculptures. You can't do that, Sandra exclaimed. It violates at least 15 HOA regulations. Actually, Imani interjected, my client has thoroughly reviewed the original community covenants. The Sycamore property predates your current regulations and is exempt from aesthetic guidelines. Karen watched with satisfaction as her carefully constructed neighborhood hierarchy crumbled before her eyes. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now planning to become everything she had once crusaded against. As the meeting devolved into chaos, Karen slipped out, Imani following close behind. That went well, the attorney said as they reached the sidewalk. Phase 1 complete, Karen replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon where construction equipment sat idle around her former home. Tomorrow, we visit the commercial developers interested in Aunt Margaret's land. For the first time in days, Karen felt a surge of exhilaration. The game had changed, but one thing remained constant. Karen Wilkins played to win. The for sale sign appeared in front of 24 Sycamore Court, precisely 3 weeks after Karen's dramatic HOA meeting. It wasn't the purple monstrosity she had threatened. Instead, it was a tastefully restored craftsman with a welcoming front porch and landscaping that managed to be both beautiful and completely regulation compliant. The asking price was exactly $1 more than Sandra Miller's home had appraised for last year. Karen sat on her porch swing, sipping lemonade and watching the steady stream of neighbors who casually walked by, curiosity overcoming their desire to avoid her. She waved pleasantly at each one, calling many by name and inquiring about their families with unexpected warmth. Mrs. Abernathy, how's your grandson doing at college? She called out to an elderly woman who nearly tripped over a crack in the sidewalk from shock at being addressed directly. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Imani. Chambers counteroffered. Still lowballing. Meeting with commercial developers tomorrow? Karen typed back, confirm meeting, and tell Chambers I'm releasing the photos to the county ethics board if he doesn't come up significantly. The photos had been an unexpected gift. Pictures of Derek Chambers meeting with county officials at a resort in Cabo last year, just before Karen's property had mysteriously been fast-tracked for auction. An anonymous envelope had appeared on Karen's temporary doorstep last week, courtesy of a county clerk whose garden gnome collection Karen had once vehemently defended against HOA regulations. Karma, it seemed, worked in mysterious ways. Her doorbell rang. Sandra Miller stood on her porch, looking as uncomfortable as a cat in water. Sandra, Karen greeted her, not rising from the swing. Lemonade. No, thank you, Sandra replied stiffly. The board has concerns about your renovation. Karen smiled. All within original covenant guidelines. I checked. That's just it, Sandra said, clutching her clipboard like a shield. It's too perfect. You've made improvements that have already increased surrounding property values by 7%. How terrible for everyone, Karen remarked dryly. Sandra lowered her voice. The association wants to know your plans. Are you staying? Selling? What's your angle? The old Karen would have reveled in Sandra's discomfort, would have stretched out this moment of power to its breaking point. But something had shifted inside her. The past month of fighting for her home, of reconnecting with neighbors as people rather than regulation violators, had changed her perspective. I'm moving on, Sandra, Karen said simply. Life's too short for paint color disputes and measuring grass height. Sandra looked genuinely lost. But that's what you do. That's who you are. Karen shook her head. Not anymore. Later that evening, Karen walked through her beautifully restored home one last time. Tomorrow it would list on the market, likely selling within days in the hot real estate climate. Her lawsuit against Chambers and the county was settling favorably. She would recover her original home, only to sell it immediately to a young family who had fallen in love with the neighborhood despite its notorious HOA. As for Aunt Margaret's inheritance, the commercial developer's offer had been substantial enough that Karen would never need to worry about money again. She used part of the proceeds to establish a community improvement fund for Sunny Pines, specifically earmarked for initiatives that brought neighbors together rather than regulations that kept them apart. Karen paused at her front door, looking back at the empty rooms. For years, she had defined herself by rules, by control, by perfection. Using everything had somehow given her something far more valuable: perspective. She locked the door behind her, leaving her HOA citation pad on the porch swing, a relic of a person she no longer wanted to be. 1 year later, Karen Wilkins pulled her car into the familiar curves of Sunny Pines Estates. But she wasn't there to issue citations or measure fence heights. She was attending a neighborhood block party as a guest. The Central Park, once a battleground of regulation enforcement, had been transformed. Children played on new equipment partially funded by the Wilkins Community Foundation. Neighbors chatted across property lines that had previously been territorial boundaries. Even the infamous 24 Sycamore Court, now owned by a young couple with twins, sported a modest tree house that would have given the old Karen an aneurysm. "The prodigal president returns," a voice said beside her. Sandra Miller approached, offering a plastic cup of punch. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Karen accepted the drink with a smile. "I wouldn't miss it. How's the HOA business?" Sandra sighed dramatically. "Exhausting. I don't know how you did it for so long. I've had to dye my hair twice this month to cover the gray." "Delegating helps," Karen suggested. "So does remembering these are homes, not museum exhibits." Sandra studied her former rival with genuine curiosity. "You've changed." "Using everything will do that," Karen acknowledged. "Best thing that ever happened to me." And it was true. After selling both properties, Karen had traveled extensively, finally using the passport she'd obtained years ago but never utilized. She'd volunteered with habitat restoration projects, taken cooking classes in Italy, and even gone skydiving, sending the photos to her astonished daughter with the caption, "Your mother is not dead yet." Across the park, she spotted Derek Chambers, looking significantly less confident than the last time she'd seen him. The ethics investigation had cost him several major contracts, though he'd avoided criminal charges. When he noticed Karen, he quickly turned away, suddenly fascinated by the dessert table. "Your lawyer friend is here too," Sandra mentioned, nodding toward the gazebo where Imani was chatting with several residents. "She's helping the Nelson family fight that ridiculous easement claim from the city." Karen felt a surge of pride. Imani had taken on several community cases after their success together, becoming something of a neighborhood champion. "Mrs. Wilkins," a small voice interrupted her thoughts as 8-year-old Zoe Peterson tugged at her sleeve. "Mom said you're the one who started the community garden. Will you help me plant my sunflowers tomorrow?" Karen bent down to the child's level. "I'd be honored. Sunflowers are my favorite." As the evening progressed, Karen found herself surrounded by the very neighbors she had once terrified. They shared stories, laughed about her more ridiculous past citations, and genuinely welcomed her back, not as their HOA president, but simply as Karen. Later, as twilight settled over Sunny Pines, Karen found herself alone by the small pond that centered the community. Her reflection wavered in the water, older, certainly, but with softer eyes and easier laughter lines. A text message illuminated her phone. A confirmation for her flight to New Zealand next month, where she would be meeting her daughter and son-in-law for a hiking adventure. Another message followed from Imani. County approved the affordable housing project on the north edge of Sunny Pines, breaking ground next month. Karen smiled, pocketing her phone as she heard the community gathering for the evening's outdoor movie. She had a choice: join them or retire to her hotel room. The old Karen would have found the gathering too disorderly, too loud, too casual. But the new Karen was still discovering who she might become. And tonight, that person wanted popcorn and community under the stars. As she turned toward the crowd, Karen noticed a new family hovering uncertainly at the edge of the gathering, clearly newcomers, looking both hopeful and hesitant. With a warm smile, she approached them, hand extended in welcome. "Hello," she said simply. "I'm Karen. Let me introduce you to your new neighbors."